if you notice this going over 12 a lot, no, just if you happen to do this, see that this goes over 12 a lot, let me know, but don't worry about it.
And then what?
Just let me know. Hello.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out. You can mostly keep talking. That's fine. I'll just talk at and over you. It's totally cool. Have fun. Keep drinking and being merry. My name's Jon Wood. This is Christian Fox on drums and Hannah Sternberg on bass. The reason I'm hunched over like this is the pickup on my guitar broke, so I'm going to microphone it. So we're playing at the Jazz Estate next week. So if you need something to do next Friday, please go to the Jazz Estate over on the east side. We got a set from 7 to 9 and 9:30 to 11. We're going to do kind of a quirky concert tonight. I'm going to play a guitar from each style and era of jazz. So this is a French guitar. They used it to play gypsy jazz in the 20s and the 30s. And so you're going to get a little taste of that. And Hannah's going to pretend to be a violin and play the bow with the bass. So here we go. right, thank you so much. That was called All of Me, but only part of my guitar was working. I'm going to change guitars real quick. If we could cut the house music, that'd be super cool. Otherwise, there's two music. That's a lot of music.
I just had to come over here to laugh, and you knocked over the camera.
Oh, that?
That was very funny.
Did it fall over?
That didn't fall over. But it was.
I
Oh, I saw it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I didn't even realize I hit that.
Oh man, I was looking up. Oh man, this is great eagle eye screaming and trying to put it back in place. And y'all had to help me.
So
See?
John's be on duty to make sure it
Yeah.
doesn't get over 7. 7.
Wow.
You didn't see that, did
It
you?
was 12.
Oh, they saw it. They were looking right at it. Y'all saw him knock the camera around, didn't you? Yeah.
I don't think John didn't see it.
I think he did it on purpose.
Way over.
Oh, okay, all right. Nothing happened. Gotta review the footage. It's pretty great. It's pretty great.
I just think like that.
No, you got it. You got it.
All right, thank you very much. This next song is going to be called Afternoon in Paris. This guitar was kind of the next kind of guitar that they designed. It's in some ways similar to that one, but it looks different, and they kind of just drilled pickups on and screwed them on there, and that's how we have electric guitars. So this is like one of the first electric guitars they ever made. much. That tune is called Afternoon in Paris. It was about a morning I spent in Paris one time. The next tune, what did I say the next one was going to be? Next tune's going to be Bye Bye Blackbird. I'm pretty tired, and I forget things when I'm tired. Again, this is like one of the first guitars that they ever put electrics on, so you're kind of looking at, like, they started doing this in like the mid-40s. This is like the first electrified guitar you're seeing here. Not the actual first one they built, but like the design of it. So we're going to keep going. I haven't played this guitar in a while and I miss it. My friend asked me if I needed this many guitars, and the answer is no, I don't need them. Not at all, but they're fun. By the way, of course, it's like, anyway, we're going to play. Thank you.
Pull up Dearly Beloved.
Alright, next tune we're going to play is called Dearly Beloved. Tune I haven't played in a long time, so I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you enjoy it. Jon Wood. If you like what you hear, please go to jonwoodguitarist.com and my Jon Wood Guitarist YouTube channel. There's all sorts of free music there. I have a bunch of CDs you can listen to anytime you want. And if you don't like what you hear, just don't tell me. I don't even know. Enjoy your night. Please keep drinking alcohol and have fun. We're really here to sell alcohol. We call it art, but not really. It's alcohol. All right, here we go.
One, two, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep, that's it. All right, so this guitar is called a Cuban Trace. If you've ever gone out salsa dancing, the salsa music that you're used to hearing is like a modern version. It outgrew out of that music from Cuba. But way back in like the 20s and the 10s and whatever, they played a lot of music. The kind of stuff you hear salsa dancing sounded a lot more like this, and they used this guitar a lot more than piano. And also, a fun little historical tidbit, most guitars used to be double stringed like this one is. So I just had a guitar shipped from Poland that they used to play in the 1700s, and it's got all double strings, so I gotta learn that too. So I hope you guys enjoy this song. It's a little Cuban Trace Jam. Okay, I don't know all the lyrics, but this makes me giggle quite a bit, and I hope you enjoy it. There's a lady who's sure all that glitters is gold, and she's buying a stairway to heaven. When she gets there, she knows that I don't remember the lyrics, but everyone wants to hear Stairway to Heaven. cool little Cuban trace jam. They didn't really, so there are songs, but it was also at that time like to just kind of jam like that. And they had all these different patterns you play on the trace. And so it kind of, almost like the blues, you know how all the blues kind of sounds the same? It was sort of like that. Like they had these little patterns that were common and they jammed on them, and it's a fun instrument. They're hard to find, but when you do, they're a good time. Alright, so this next tune is called Wave. Latin music really hit in the 30s and the 40s with the mambo, and then there was kind of a break, and then the 50s, Latin music became really popular. And then since the 90s, people like to salsa dance in America quite a bit. But in the 60s, this music that we're about to play called Bossa Nova came out of Brazil. And they use guitars like this. And this is actually a guitar. There was a family in Spain that started building guitars in like the 1910s, and then their children kept building guitars. And it's called the Conde family. So this is like a historic guitar. And this is made in in 1967. And last thing I'll say is the reason I wear the sleeve, because I know somebody's going to ask, is it keeps the finish from getting worn by the oils in your skin. So some of these guitars are antiques. So we're going to play Wave for you, and Hannah here is going to take the melody, and I hope you all enjoy. and then we're going to take a break. Fun little fact for you. In the end of the 60s, the #1 jazz magazine called Downbeat inducted Jimi Hendrix into the Jazz Hall of Fame. Jon Wood on guitar. Please check out JonWoodGuitarist.com and Jon Wood Guitarist on YouTube. There's a lot of free CDs. Everybody used to listen to my CDs when I used to print them. Said they made great coasters. So high praise. Hannah Sternberg on bass and Christian Fox on drums. My cats' names are Charlotte and Isabel. It doesn't matter. I just love cats. So we're at take 10. Please keep drinking alcohol and thank you for coming out.